Afterwards, we're going to leave about 20 to 25 minutes to go over individual questions. So I guess to get us started, what I'd like to really focus on is something
Now,
that I'm, yes, can you hear me?
there was some technical issue at my end,
Oh, no problem.
not able to introduce you properly.
Oh,
So
sure.
I'll just do with the presentation if that's fine.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Welcome everyone. Welcome to. So glad to have you, and we are from University of Pennsylvania. So Lara today will be talking to us about the undergrad this time. So without wasting any more time, I would like to hand over to Lara. But yes, we'll be taking questions towards the end of the presentation. And of this session, yes, this session is being recorded, and we will be providing you with a recording in about 3 weeks' time. So, more time, I would like to hand over to Lara. Lara, please take the stage.
Great. Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate that introduction. Um, so to get us started off, I think it's really critical before we talk about tips and tricks for crafting an effective essay. I think it's really critical to ground the role that the essay plays in our process. And so when we talk about evaluating applications, we always use this word holistic. And I put up this graphic because I think it's really critical for students to remember that your application is going to be comprised of so many components. The components that you see currently on the screen that are highlighted in red, those are typically the very first components that we're looking at to really understand who you are as a scholar. So we're turning to your transcript, looking at the curriculum that you've taken, where the rigor has fallen. We're looking at your standardized test scores as a measurement for academic ability. We're turning to your teacher recommendations to understand how you think and learn in the classroom, how you collaborate with others. Your counselors who are giving recommendations are helping us understand who you are as a member of your school community from a slightly larger perspective. We could even possibly, specifically at Penn, we are interviewing, we have a phenomenal alumni interview community based in India, and so we're interviewing nearly 90% of our applicants. We're striving to interview 100%. But what we're going to be focusing on today are really these pieces that allow you to bring in your voice, students, and those are going to be your essays. There's two different types of essays that we're going to be talking about today. One is going to be your personal statement. This is really drilling down into your voice, what matters to you. Then there's also a school-specific essays that many schools require. They can vary from school to school. And then we're going to also be offering tips for approaching those school-specific essays. But what you will hear is there is a common theme from each, whether it's the personal essay or the school-specific essay. It's going to be this theme of reflection and research, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. So really, in terms of the big picture objectives here, when it comes to crafting an effective essay, you really want to be thinking about how are you telling your stories. This is going beyond your grades, going beyond your test scores. What's the narrative that you want to put together in terms of what matters most in your life right now? What are you interested in today? And how is that going to translate to a college campus? So really think of this as the opportunity to help an admissions committee get to know you. This is also your opportunity, of course, to display that you have strong writing skills. We want to make sure that your essay is crafted in your own unique voice. Okay. Thanks for your patience with these technical difficulties. We also want to make sure, though, that your essay is going to on just your intellectual depth of thought, so that this is an opportunity to really highlight how you think and engage with the world. But then ultimately, fundamentally, so, some of these questions, and we'll talk about this in a moment, for the personal statement, you have a lot of liberties that you can take. For school-specific, you want to make sure that you're answering the prompt that is provided by that individual school, and we'll touch on that in a moment. So I also just want to speak about the role that the essay has in this process. You know, what we say is that an essay can never resurrect an application, in that if you don't have the academic qualifications, even the most verbose, most eloquent, witty, written essay is not going to supersede the 4 years or that you've been spending in the classroom at the secondary school level. How Talking about highly selective schools like Penn, schools within the Ivy League, the vast majority of students who apply are absolutely academically. So because we have base of that academic qualification, we know that they can do well on our college campus, they know that they would succeed within the rigor of our classroom. So as Martha Merrill, she's Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Connecticut College, what she says is that the truth is that while no essay will make an good essay can help a qualified applicant stand out from the competition. A good essay just might be what turns a maybe into a yes. And I want to, students often feel they have no control in the college admissions process, that decisions are being rendered completely at random. And what I'd like, oh, I noticed, here we go. I'm noticing that there's issues with audio. I'm going to try, the camera is actually closer. Okay, I'm going to keep, know that there's some audio reports. I brought my microphone even closer to me. And again, rest assured that we will make it recorded, even if it's after the fact, to make sure everyone has some tips. What I was saying was that students have a great amount of agency in this process, in the sense that is needed to properly craft effective essays. Most students, at least based in the States, are crafting around, on average, they're applying to 8 universities. So what that means is they have typically around 8 essays. And so what we see in admissions very typically are essays that are fine, perhaps what we call standard strong. So the students really haven't taken a lot of reflection and time to think about what matters most to them in their essays. And it shows of you time and effort writing and rewriting and treating writing as a process that it truly is, are going to see powerful results. I'm going to switch over to webcam just to see if that is helping with the audio. Okay. So for students to keep in mind and consider, as they're approaching these essays, is to really remember staff. Essentially, what we're trying to answer are really, some questions such as, what are you like? What matters most to you? How do you think and engage with this? There's no need for risks or gimmicks, students. You just want to be able to put your best foot forward. I would like to touch on is the personal statement. So if you are applying through the Common Application, there are over 700 colleges and universities, the majority of them based in the United States. Application. In the Common Application, there's going to be a personal statement that you can craft. There are 5 prompts that you can choose from. The prompts essentially much more verbose listed here. The prompts ultimately boil down to 5 different topics. The majority of students, I'd say over half of the students to answer prompts are choosing the first prompt, which is a question about personal identity, where you're describing and speaking to your background or personal story that is absolutely you. The other that are available are failure and how it impacted you. When you've taken a stand, challenging a belief or idea, learn. There's a question prompt on problem solving. You know, what problem have you solved, or what problem would you solve? What would be or what is your approach, and why does this issue? Then there's also the coming of age. So, you know, what's a point in your life where you've had a transition in from a childhood into a, and so you select prompts, and you're going to have, I believe it's 650 words to answer it. You do have to make sure to utilize that space. And prompts as being limiting. What I actually would encourage you to do, students, first is to think about what topic do I really want to tackle? What matters most to me? And to fit that topic around prompts because they are so broad in scope. I want to address first, I think, common pitfalls that I see when students are tackling on the personal statement, and they're broken down into 2 different. First is content, style. So when it comes to these personal statements, I think students, you need to think about these just as you would think about marinating a roast. So you are taking your time. You have this absolute beautiful pot roast. If you let it marinate overnight, if then the next morning on a very low temperature for 5 or 6 hours, it's going to be tender. It's going to be perfect. If you aren't able to marinate it, you throw it into the oven and then you take it out 2 hours later, it's going to be tough. It's not going to have been reached its full potential. So the thing here is that you are thinking and reflecting about what essay topic that you'd like to speak to. You know, what really is a part of your core identity. Is that along lines is that a student will tackle a prompt. They'll tackle a very large problem, say it's world hunger, but they're going to be forgetting back on themselves. Another example that I always like to give is a student will be speaking about someone who matters greatly in their life. That could be, for instance, grandmother. In essay, we can picture grandmother, we know grandmother's story, and at the end of that essay, we want to admit grandmother. The key here is always on a similar vein, the other issue that we typically is that too large of a picture. So keep in mind that you really have to think big but write small. And in that we mean this is not going to be an life story with 150 words. You have to really drill down about what is going to be mattering most to you. I also think what we see in terms of content is what we call a formula essay. This is an essay that tackles a common topic, such as a surgery or an athletic injury, where we typically know the outcome before we even complete reading the essay. If you have the opportunity to Google This American Life, How My Colleague, the admissions at Georgia Tech speaks about this very topic. So really wanting to make sure that you're not falling into essays where we know the outcome before. The other pitfalls that we see are in terms of style. And, you know, I know that there's so much application process, and students sometimes, you know, in their effort to impress the admissions committee, they adopt a style of voice in their writing that is not their own. An example of, you know, a student is using overly intellectual language. They have gone over the top in terms of the thesaurus use. They are their coaches to be crafting these essays rather than using their own words. And what that results is an inauthentic voice. And so I encourage students to read their essays, not only sound like them, but always have a purpose. And tied to that, I think, remember that admissions officers are reading to remember to tell a compelling story. And make sure that your essay is putting us in possible and going back to that old adage of show, don't tell. And that also is bringing us to our next point, which is what happens if you err. And we'd like you to get as specific as possible when it comes to details in a scene or where your passions lie. Then when it comes to school-specific, individual schools are going to be requiring that you write. These not only require reflection, but they also require research in order to write effectively. I'll use Penn's as an example. Penn's supplemental essay is, given your undergraduate school choice, what do you hope to engage? And in order to write an effective school essay, this is going to require a deep amount of reflection, not just of who you are and what your interest is, but what type of student are you? Engineering. Are you a student who's going to be embracing the liberal arts? And then pairing that with research of that individual institution. So why specifically, you know, what research, what faculty members, what hubs on campus, such as our Pan-Asian American Community House. The other piece that I'd like to touch on is kind of bringing and bridging those two together. So not only does it require a deep amount of reflection and research, it fully integrates yourself with the college. And I'm going to offer a few tips on that in this next slide. So for school-specific questions, some schools like Penn's prompt are going to be very straightforward. Other schools, you know, for instance, Stanford has an essay prompt that says, write a letter to your future. Be sure of answering the question and think about why they are answering that question. Stanford's admissions office is really, you know, in that instance, trying to understand who you are as a person, who you're going to be in the classroom, but part of the broader community. And so, in addition to kind of thinking and reflecting on why they're asking that question, what do you want to, what impact do you want to have in that university and community? You know, based on what you've been involved with in secondary school, you know, what do you want to carry forward? That brings you to the research piece. So research the why Penn, why insert college name here. And you want to be able to name specifics that matter, but that matter simply regurgitating information that you found on our university website, but reflecting on what matters most to you and highlighting those specifics. I often see when it comes to school-specific essays are any University USA. What I mean by that is we will see supplemental essays for Penn. Be a part of Penn's incredible intellectual community, study alongside world-class professors, and be a part of a diverse and passionate student body. Long. But though that sentence is grammatically correct, the issue there is that that sentence doesn't capture the essence of Penn. That sentence your institutions. So just as you want to be capturing your unique voice, your unique fingerprint for the Common Application personal statement, you also are capturing the school's unique ethos that you're applying to in school-specific essays. You also really want to make sure that your word possible to serve a purpose in these essays. You really don't have to lean on platitudes. You know, I believe that my institution is absolutely you to tell me that we are a world-renowned institution. And so for that, I ask students to dig a little bit deeper. Penn or on the college that they're applying to, and they're not tying it back to themselves, then that makes it difficult for the admissions committee to understand your motivations for why. Along the same veins, if you're only focusing on yourself and you're not focusing on the college in your school-specific essay, that to envision you on our campus. So you want to find a way to balance your focus and integrate your interest with what the university has. In terms of tips and tricks, really reading your essay out loud is going to allow you um, to be able to catch any there, because the theme that you should be really approaching these essays with is quality over quantity. Keep in mind, admissions officers are reading a great number of want you to be direct when possible. Really, every sentence should be adding value. Keep in mind, you know, going back to our very first slide about the holistic applications process, admissions officers will be reading your application as a sum of pieces. So we'll have read both your personal statement for the common, you know, your love for linguistics, and then we're going to be also reading your school-specific essay, which might then drill into doing really interesting translational work. The other piece going back is remember to tell a story, to paint a picture, to put admissions officers in a scene. We whatever topic it is that you're speaking of. And then to really let topics and drafts marinate. Give yourself plenty of time in this process. Sometimes progress or not making progress is to just let a draft sit overnight for a day or two, sleep on it, ruminate on it, and then come back to it. You're also always welcome or your school-specific supplements to a educator, to your parents for input, but ultimately this is going to be your voice and your future. Really follow your instincts there. And at the end of the day, you are always focusing on the why. Why this topic in your personal statement? Why are you applying to this college instead of the what it is that a college offers, the what it is that you want to be doing. Admissions officers are always really trying to understand your motive and answering that question of why rather than what. And then in closing, what I really want to emphasize to you is to believe in yourself in this process. You know, Ernest Hemingway that say, do not worry, you have always written before and you will write now. And what I hope you take away from this is his words of all you have to do is write the truest sentence that you know. I know that there have been some audio issues here. I greatly appreciate your flexibility and patience, and I'd like to open it up for some Q&A.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being so patient with our technical difficulties here. We generally don't encounter such on our platform, but today for a huge audience here, we are expecting such difficulties here. But if you have any queries for Lara, type in on the chat located on your right side, and I'll be flashing your questions on the screen so that Lara can answer them. Yes, to type in your questions in the chat box so that Lara can answer them.
Generally, how long does a personal statement have to be? Wonderful question. A personal statement is going to be no more than a single space page. So the Common Application limits the words. So really keep that in mind. There is no flexibility there. You won't be able to upload your statement if it goes over that limit. Quality over quantity here. Great question about how do we close a personal statement. And this, I think, is where you really get to have a little fun, students as the applicant. You know, I've seen students have in their personal statement. Sometimes they'll actually start with the closing in their personal statement and then circle it back around to the circle it back at the end of the essay back. I'm going to tell you a story about failing, and then they will proceed to do so and then close it out with, you know, lessons that they learn from failures. There's really no right or wrong, but I make sure when you're closing the personal statement to make sure that it's going to be have a finite conclusion so that the admissions officer has that sense of closure. Most often in closing the personal statements is a larger reflection about yourself and how a larger reflection of some. A lot of students close personal statements in a compelling way. Wonderful question. The next question is, can we talk about any personal achievements? And here's where I would tread cautiously, because keep in mind that you are going to be able to list your awards and accolades that are in admissions officers will be able to see, for instance, if you're head prefect or head girl. And they're also going to be hearing from, you know, 3 educators in your life who are going to. So you will have a lot of great opportunity for advocacy. And so what I would encourage you to think about is the personal statement shouldn't be an opportunity for you to achievements that you've made. However, if you have, for instance, you know, let's just say you've been deeply involved in community service and you have some awards in really compelling, if you explain to us why you were compelled into a field of service, why civic engagement matters to you, that I think is a way, that would be a very effective topic. That goes back to the explaining to us the why it is that you do what you do rather than the what. The next question, it says, how can we make the facts about our life really not maybe so? I want to write about myself, but perhaps not in that interesting way enough for a university. How do I resolve this? Wonderful question. Sometimes the very best essays are written about the mundane facts of life. I've had a student write about just their daily ride to work on their daily way. That was a beautifully told essay that allowed me insight what it was like to live and to grow up in the student's community. The student was making observations about how his and tied that into his interest in political science because he wants to go into the public service realm. So believe me, you may not think that your life is interesting. You know, as a student, think about that you live in a really unique place. If you're thinking about considering schools stateside, there are vast differences about your everyday life. Your worldview is interesting. And when you embrace that, I think it can make for a very powerful essay. I'll use the example of a young woman who was she wrote her essays about baking biscuits, which is a very traditional Southern dish. And it was a very simple essay about baking biscuits. However, she was able to talk about the role of life within her identity as a Southerner. All throughout that essay, she interwove the fact of how the biscuits, the chemistry behind the biscuits baking, because guess what? She So that's an example of a very simple essay that is boring, quote unquote, but that we in the admissions committee found very compelling. Should the essay be focused on one event, or can we talk about different events or activities? Great question. Students, I think there is absolutely a balance that you need to strike. The balance being that you only have 650 words to tell your story. So if you try um, multiple topics, that can pose a challenge because you don't want to dilute your words. So I think it's absolutely okay to weave in one pieces about your identity or about one or two different passions that you may have, but just to choose wisely because you want to make sure that whatever you're speaking about, you're able to. The next question is, admissions officer, thinking about our personal experiences, how deep can we dive? And that is, again, I think a balancing act that you have to strike as the applicant. Really get to know you. We'd like to understand what's going on in your life, what matters to you, how you think and engage with the world. And we also want to understand if you have significant obstacles in understand, the journey that you've traveled. There is a way to share that that's appropriate. So by that, I mean, rather than just focus, say, for instance, in obstacles that you've encountered, you want to make sure that you're not just looking back over, what you've overcome. You want to look forward. So in your life, how does that impact you now? How is that going to be impacting what you're bringing to a college campus and how you hope to engage in that community? So you can get appropriate. We want to hear the voice of a 17 or an 18-year-old, but we also know that there are certain topics that you really don't want to be, oversharing about. Can I give an example of an essay that has stood out to you? Oh, great question. So I gave the essay about a student baking biscuits. I gave the tackled a daily subway ride. Actually, when it comes to a pen-specific essay, some of the best essays that I've seen are students who really did their research, so they perfectly married their interests. It was one of our coordinated degree programs. And then they were able to actually think about how that program and curricular could marry in a way that we hadn't seen the program be used before. So that student had really done their research, had done a deep amount of reflection over what it is that she, was interested in studying to make on the world, and she was able to articulate that in her essay. The next question is, how do you achieve a balance between rhetoric and creativity in the content of the essay, specifically the why X college? That is a phenomenal question. Actually, if you listen to that podcast that I referenced, How I Got Into College, what we recognize as admissions in some circumstances, and I think Penn is guilty of this, we ask relatively generic or boring prompts. So that does not allow for as much creativity as some universities. So there's some universities and their school-specific question is, tell us about your inner nerd, or they'll have a very, U Chicago always has very X to you. Those allow for an incredible creative intellectual approach. For school-specific essays that are more straightforward, I think you have, but it is somewhat limited. So I'd say that there your challenge really is to stay within the confines of the prompt. I'll use Penn as an example. Certainly we'd like to see some creative elements, but ultimately we do need specifics about what you're interested in studying, even if you are voraciously undecided, centers, what hubs, what faculty members that you're hoping to be involved with. So I will say that there is less creative licensing in the Why College essay prompt. In my opinion, what makes a personal essay really stand out amongst the thousands of essays that you receive, any thoughts or guidance? Really, students, I can't emphasize enough, if you are spending time reflecting about your application as a whole, what it is that you'd like to say. This is really, in a lot of ways, this is just like an interview where you only have a very brief amount of time. And I think makes for the most effective essays are those deep levels of reflection, but then tied with a very authentic voice. So students who are not afraid to really see a 17 or 18-year-old who is applying, who might be extremely excited to join our intellectual community, but also a little bit nervous, and that's okay. Who approaches our curriculum with an open mind, who is so excited to really step outside of their comfort zone intellectually and socially, that's always something that we. So the next failure topic, can we talk about a personal failure rather than a failure in a test or something we were unable to do, such as if we want to write about what we don't like about ourselves, realize was it. I think the question that you're asking in terms of, is there one right way to answer the failure prompt? There is absolutely not. The failure prompt can be academic failure. It can be a larger, more philosophical failure. Absolutely. I think ultimately however answer the prompt, go for it. What I will say is the key with the failure essay is really not just kind of walking us through how you look forward. How is that going to translate to who you are today and the person who's going to be stepping forward on your college campus? How should we establish a good hook for our essay? Oh man, you guys are so savvy. A good hook. I think a good hook is recognizing essay prompts, essay prompts about a service trip where, the student will basically start off saying, I went on a service trip with the of others, but ultimately, and then usually it will describe a scene or two, but then ultimately that essay prompt will then circle back to, but ultimately, the people, that I was for, right? So that's a formula essay. I've seen very successful essays on service trips, but I want to just acknowledge that that's harder to do because typically we know the outcome speaking of. So I would say avoiding kind of more formulaic, if you will, topics. And then the other thing I think is just having a really if recognizing that admissions officers are reading dozens of these essays. So not only do you want to have an authentic voice, but you also want to really kind of So this is a question, it's a student finishing up high school. They're in the humanities field, but they want to change and make a transition into a different field within computer science. And so ultimately, I think this question is really posing, I have done X, but now I want to do Y. How do I address that? And the essay is the perfect opportunity so you could explain to the admissions committee, why your placement of study has been within a certain field, why your focus has been in a certain field, and explain that pivot to us. What actions have you taken to really set you on this different pathway, and why does that matter to you? We recognize that as human beings, we change. Our change. The beauty of higher education, especially within a liberal arts curriculum, is that you're going to be discovering new intellectual passions at all points in time. Use the essay as an opportunity for that. Is it vocabulary guidance? Yes, absolutely. Use spell check. But what I will say is that use them sparingly, because can never be a reading. By that, I mean spell check is never going to pick up words that are spelled correctly. Every year we have students who say that they have, been in an international instead of an international baccalaureate. We've had students apply to the Wharton School of Bunnies versus the Wharton School of Business. So absolutely, spell check never be a substitute for proofreading. In terms of vocabulary guidance, again, I want to really encourage you students to use sparingly, because what's happen is say is going to sound as though it's written by a 40-year-old lawyer rather than an 18-year-old applicant. So the next question is, how many aspects of our personality should we include in our essay? And that is a great, again, think about all of the pieces of your application that the admissions officers will probably read before they even encounter your essay. So opening up in this order your transcripts and your standardized testing. They're looking at your school profile to understand what academic offerings are within school. They're turning to your teacher recommendations, getting an understanding of not just who you are as a scholar, how you learn, how you engage, how you collaborate, but also your personality. Educators will speak to when you have mastered all the material, do you turn and help a peer? They will talk to us about kind of the impact you've made within a community. Have a leadership. What's your leadership style? So we will have already gotten to know you from kind of these outside perspectives before we even open up your essays. To say that you don't have about every facet of your personality, about every interest that you may have. That's, I think, the crux of what I'm getting at here is recognizing that you get to tell us how you've spent your time within the extracurricular section of the Common Application. Really, given all of that information we have in front of us, is going to really resonate or is really needed to complete your narrative within this holistic process. So you don't need to outline of your personality. Beings, we all have different identities. We all have different pieces about ourselves. The other piece that I will say is keep in mind, you may also be offered in this interview to have, a face-to-face connection where, an alumni interview would be providing feedback. It's both an informational and evaluative interview. We'll also be providing feedback to say, this applicant has an incredible sense of humor along with a really budding interest in neuroscience or whatever it may be. And how to make an impressive beginning. I really think it's read your essay out loud. Read the first, say, like 2 or 3 Does that, after you've read that essay out loud, perhaps you've even read that essay to a friend, were they compelled? Were you compelled to keep reading? Admissions officers, we are incredibly fast readers and we're great. We're really great at, our attention is lost quickly. We will certainly read many of your essays, but there's a difference between engaged in an essay. So I'd say read your, make several drafts. You don't have to get stuck. What I would recommend is actually if you're brainstorming on a topic, get stuck figuring out the creative beginning or the creative ending. Just write as much as possible for your first drafts and iterations. And typically the introduction and the conclusion are very last things that really what you want to focus on is deciding what topic you're tackling, writing as much as possible and getting as much content down, and then only after that begin to sharpen your to kind of draw those hooks into both the beginning and conclusion of your essay. People saying the faster we send off the application, the higher our chances of getting into the university. Is this true in any way? Oh my goodness, no, 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 no. We want their time. I hope I drilled into this theme of really giving yourself the opportunity to reflect, to write multiple drafts of an essay. Writing and takes multiple drafts. So we want to, of course, you have to make sure that you're abiding by university deadlines. But with that said, and there are some schools, if it is rolling admissions means that, the earlier that you apply, the earlier you will get a response, and typically it is beneficial to apply early in that process. But in non-rolling decision schools, such as Penn, the majority of schools, I'd say, do not have rolling admissions, though that is not really should be taking your time. Because keep in mind that as an admissions officer, I am spending time. You have submitted an application. I am hoping that you have that application as careful consideration and as much time and reflection as it deserves. When we see a haphazardly assembled application that is full or might lack that kind of deeper level of thoughtfulness, that's not going to be sending us a strong signal about how you're going to be using our campus resources. So, in summary, please, please take your time when crafting these essays. How can we answer the question, why are you suited for X university, without just rattling off our own activities? Question. And I think what you're doing here is you're bragging about yourself, but in a humble way. So I think it's not just going back to had accomplishments equivalent at X university, it's that integration piece. So, you may have excelled within the STEM fields in your secondary, but you're true teacher. And in that case, I think that would be a really interesting and compelling essay for us to read, because here you are saying, I've always been great at when I'm going for this intellectual, this intellectual depth and breadth, here's where my interest lies. So I think you do have to kind of toot your own horn a little bit, but it's rattling off your achievements and more about understanding and explaining to us the why behind it. So why have you decided to take rigor within this field of courses versus another? Why have you decided to get involved in student government or the performing arts or athletics, whatever it may be? What we're trying to answer is, what are you passionate about today in this moment? And then the next question is, during the application review process, do college separate the applications according to essay type and review it? we will not know what you're choosing to write about until we open up your application. Typically, the way admissions offices sort quote unquote applications, we read every. There are no cutoffs, there are no minimum requirements. We're reading every single application that we receive, which again goes back to we want to make successful candidates make sure that they have put a lot of time to their applications. And so the way that we typically sort applications is we have something called territory managers. So territory managers are responsible for the nuances of a specific educational system at a school, county, or perhaps even state or country level. So, I, as a territory manager, have to really understand the nuances of the curriculum that's offered within your individual school and throughout all of India. We have individual admissions officers, the state of New Jersey, if you will, or the state of Louisiana. And so that is how we're sorting applications, not by essay topic. It's by. Does it hurt in any way if your essay is devoid of platitude, generic quotes from poems, from Frost that gets around a lot? I don't want my essays to have any quotes or anything generic for that matter, but everyone tells me that I need to polish my essay and add generic quotes, etc. Question quite often. I've seen students effectively interweave quotes throughout their essay, but at the end of the day, I always feel like your own words are more powerful. So I think you are spot on in terms of thinking about how do I make sure that, if something is airing generic, to always bring it back to yourself and trust yourself. Yes, absolutely welcome to rely on your own words rather than the words of others. And as for platitudes, missions love to be complimented. The reason that we work for our university, our job is actually to make sure that our university is well represented. Our job is to know all of the figures to faculty ratio. I can tell you how many classes have fewer than 25 students. I can tell you our research budget. Those are not facts and figures that you need to repeat to me in a specific essay. It's my job to bleed red and blue. So I think that when students are falling into the trap of rehashing to us information that we already, that is opportunity that they have in their essay. Instead, what I'm more interested in, rather than you telling me that Penn is a phenomenal research university, why you're interested in research, say in the social sciences, and perhaps tying it to a faculty member who has piqued your interest. The next question is, can my personal statement talk about my interests and passions in life? So if I cook and it's changed me as a person, but if it has nothing to do with mechanical academic choice, is there a connection between these two necessarily in the personal statement? That's a wonderful question. And I think this question essentially drilled down application as a whole. So if you know that you're applying to mechanical engineering and your educators, your teachers who are writing on your behalf also know that you're applying to mechanical engineering, they're going to be speaking to that. They're going to be speaking about your love for mathematics and physics and problem solving, and hopefully you are a collaborative learner as well, which are the background of engineering. So those highlighted in your teacher recommendation. In the school-specific essay, you absolutely should be drilling down into why mechanical engineering at X. And so the personal statement might be an opportunity to really express something completely different about yourself. If it is the love for cooking, it is athletics, if it's taking care of your family members, perhaps, whatever it may be, absolutely. And I think I encourage students to think about presenting with multiple ideas. What would be really interesting if you are able to interweave the two, remember that young woman who I mentioned who was baking biscuits, but wove perspective her as the biscuits were baking, that then I think kind of raises the bar, that creates a really nice integration of the two, but I don't want you to feel trapped as though, so it is different facets about yourself. But what I would say is, I think, your love for cooking, we don't really need to discover. You don't need to guess, through your whole life story about how your passion for cooking started at the age of 2, and then in middle school you really found out that you could cook a souffle, whatever it may be. I think you capture really concisely how you discovered this passion and how it makes you unique. The next question is, should all essays reflect back to the major that we're applying to? And same exact to correlate exactly with what I hope to apply in college. And the answer is not always. I encourage you to really pick a fact. Maybe working with school administrators to change and influence a policy at your school community, and you're ultimately interested in studying medicine. But, I think if you were working with school or administrators to really affect change, I'm curious about that. That's a big impact that you've made within your school community, and that would absolutely be in your personal statement. So they don't always have to correlate your personal statement topic and the major that you're interested in. Keep in mind, as an admissions officer, that the vast majority of students who come into our universities change their minds and majors. So we're thinking of that. We're thinking and we understand that you might declare a new major or maybe even be a double major. We see that quite frequently. So they don't necessarily have to correlate. I think the trick then, your alumni interview, if you are offered one, to be able to speak in depth to where your academic interests lie. And then we are just waiting on the next question is, what are things you would keep in mind while judging a personal essay? Oh, great question. I think the thing to keep in presentation, even though you can't see my face, something to keep in mind is that we are human beings. Admissions officers are living and breathing humans. We have likes, we have dislikes, we have attention. So I think oftentimes students believe that we are reading these essays in a cloistered ivory tower and that they have to be as I think most concerned about what admissions officers want to hear. Instead, what I encourage you to remember is that, admissions officers are reading these applications in not just as one individual, but as multiple, and so that you are able to be personal, you are able to use an authentic voice, you are able to talk about not whatever your story may be. So I think keeping that in mind hopefully alleviates a little anxiety or stress in this process and allows you to focus on matters rather than focusing specifically on stress of how can I get accepted. The fact that you're attending this webinar, the fact that you're already thinking about being effective, you're going to be in a strong position in the coming months to put together a very compelling application. So we have final two questions, I believe, here. If we are selected, are we interviewed for our essay? So I can only speak to Penn's interview policy. Other universities, it varies. At Penn, we believe that fundamentally that if you apply to Penn, that we want you to have a face-to-face in-person conversation with one of our trained interview population all throughout India, Central and East Asia. And so that interviewer is not going, they are not trained. Here are the 5 questions that every applicant to Penn is asked. Instead, they are really trained to have a conversation with you. So in preparing for that interview is going to be the same preparation for your school-specific essays and personal statements. You need to reflect and do your research. By that, I mean our alumni interview, you're to have a conversation and think ahead of time, what do I want to talk about? What are the things that I really feel like this alumni interviewer should know about me, able to cover in my application? The best alumni interviewers that I know, when you or an applicant polished resume saying, here are all of my extracurricular achievements, here are all my accolades, the interviewer will turn over that piece of paper and say, that is wonderful. Now, what do you thinking and having an answer prepared for that will, I think, benefit you in the long run, because you're going to be able to talk about substance, talk about and where your interests lie, rather than the what it is that you've accomplished. I hope that proves useful. The final question that we have is, will an applicant be scrutinized in any way if he or she writes to a conventional essay? When it comes to the personal statements, we applaud creative approaches. The only potential downfall that I can see is going back to that piece where you have to tie it back to yourself. So are you going to be able to convey as much information as you can in a poem? It might show that you are an incredible writer. To see your performance within English, we're going to be able to hear from your teacher speaking about your ability as a writer. So do not let a creative of us getting to know who you are as an applicant would be the one word of warning that I would strike with that. But I strongly and applaud, your instincts here. Take a creative route.
So much, Lara. Thank you for logging in so early. For all of you who've logged in, the time when Lara logged in was actually 6:30. Much for logging in so early and helping students understand the undergrad essays. Again, I would like to apologize for the technical difficulties. Putting up the recording of this session on our YouTube channel, that's Education USA India, shortly. So I hope you'll be able to also, there were quite a few questions that were extremely generic in nature or related to admissions or were repetitive. So that's why we have a good mix of queries across the board are answered effectively. Of course, in case of any additional queries, you can write to us at usief.org.in. And yes, we do understand that it's very important for you to hear the answer to, and we would be surely doing that. Along with the questions and answers is being recorded, and as I said, we'll be putting it up on our YouTube channel. So thank you everyone, and thank you Lara. Thank you for doing this.
My pleasure. Thank you for everything.
of course, we will try to put this YouTube recording earlier than that. Have all your details. We have your email IDs. So we would like you to, so that you can surely get in touch with us recording on through your emails.